Chapter 6 of The House on the Downs by Gladys Edson Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Something wrong at the Grange. Mark had hardly closed his chamber door when there came a gentle, deprecating tap upon it. He opened the door and beheld standing hesitatingly on the threshold a little faded woman in plain black silk with a bunch of keys at her waist. "I am the housekeeper, Mrs. Carswell," she explained in a low, colorless voice. "I hope you find everything comfortable, sir?" "Entirely so," Mark assured her, with a quiet smile. Still she lingered, nervously jingling the keys. Perhaps I'm overstepping, Mr. Brandon, but I'd like to ask if Sir Quenton said anything to you about there being something wrong here at the Grange?" "Something wrong at the Grange?" Mark repeated in astonishment. "No, Mrs. Carswell, he did not." "Perhaps I'd better say nothing, then." She started to move away. Mark noted the quivering of her features and uttered a protest. "Just a minute, Mrs. Carswell. If there's anything I can do—" "Oh, it isn't anything definite." She steadied her lips. "I may make too much of it. Sir Quenton thinks I do. If I tell you, perhaps you'll not mention my doing so to Sir Quenton. He might be displeased with me, and no doubt he will tell you himself if the things go on." Mark promised that he would keep his own counsel. "But I'll not deny you are making me curious, Mrs. Carswell." The little housekeeper glanced anxiously down the corridor to assure herself that she would not be overheard. "You may make light of it, Mr. Brandon, as Sir Quenton tries to do, but there's odd happenings been going on here for a matter of 3 or 4 months now. Little things in themselves, perhaps, but it is only Providence that has prevented them turning into bad disasters. We are finding it hard to keep servants. Only those who have grown up at the Grange, as it were, will face it out. 2 housemaids and a footman have left within a month. I had such difficulty getting a new housemaid that I sent for my niece, Cicely, just out of school. How long she will stay, I am sure I couldn't say." Mark's curiosity was mounting. "But what is it all about, Mrs. Carswell?" The housekeeper, with another nervous glance down the corridor, lowered her already repressed voice. "Odd, inexplicable accidents, Mr. Brandon, that don't seem to have any cause for happening. Among other things, the fall of a heavy picture over Lady Eve's escritoire. It's a mercy she wasn't sitting there at the time. And now, 2 nights ago, a big bronze bust of Sir Gregory Rotherdene, the founder of the family, which stood in a niche above the gallery that runs around the great hall, came crashing down, barely missing Lady Eve and Lord Mostyn, who were talking together at the foot of the stairs." Mrs. Carswell shuddered. "I can't think that this was an accident, whatever the other happenings were. I feel it was human hands did this. I was just turning into the gallery myself when the lights were suddenly switched off, and there came a terrible crash and a scream from Lady Eve. But when I had found the other switch and turned on the lights, there was no one in the gallery. The bronze bust was lying on the flagstones, battered and crushed. Lady Eve had fainted, and Lord Mostyn was almost as white as she. Her ladyship has not been herself since, and no wonder. Twice, as you might say, she has just escaped death. If she had been sitting at her desk when that picture fell, it would have killed her. The chair she always sat in was splintered to bits." Mark looked very grave. "What does Sir Quenton think of all this?" "Until that bust fell, he always maintained that everything was accidental. But he is worried now, as all of us are, except Mr. Alwyn, and he doesn't appear to be even interested. But he isn't one to show his feelings, Mr. Alwyn isn't, so I may read him wrong. I know Sir Quenton would like to think that the fall of the bust was an accident, but he sees it couldn't very well have toppled over without hands to push it. Now with the picture it was different." "What about the picture?" Mark urged. Mrs. Carswell again glanced up and down the corridor. "I oughtn't to be standing here gossiping, but I will say that the strands of wire cable which held the picture to the wall did look as though they had been hacked through, not simply worn by age, as Sir Quenton would have it." "By Jove!" exclaimed Mark. "In the face of these accumulated disasters, isn't Sir Quenton having an investigation made? By the police, I mean?" Mrs. Carswell moistened her lips. "He can't bring himself to believe that anyone here would do such things deliberately, but it's worrying him, Mr. Brandon. I can see that. I didn't mean to say so much, but you know how it is when a thing is on your mind. If Sir Quenton finds I've been gossiping to you, he may think I have overstepped my duties. But I didn't like the thought that you might be wakeful and wander out into the halls, for it's at night, you know, these odd things happen. And there's lesser things I haven't named. Rugs rolled up and put where a body is likely to trip over them, and sometimes a chair dangerously out of place, too." One night last week, Miss Fazenda Lee went out into the hall for some reason and fell over a footstool that had no cause to be there, and almost pitched headlong down the stairs that lead to the library. I can't blame the servants for leaving, and now there has been a murder in the Hollow, it will be worse than ever. Well, good night, Mr. Brandon. I am sorry to have kept you so long." Mark watched the frail little figure flutter down the corridor. Then he closed the door and prepared for bed. By George, here at the Grange he would find data sufficient for another novel. Mrs. Carswell seemed of the neurotic type. Undoubtedly she had exaggerated things, but the murder of Craddock Rayner in Rotherdene Hollow was stark reality. Hang it all, he wished he could forget that platinum bracelet set with diamonds which Inspector Haskett had taken from the dead man's pocket. Oh, he was an ass to give rein to his imagination like this. Of course, it was only coincidence that Eve should have lost a bracelet of that description. It was Fazenda Lee, not Eve, who had some connection with Rayner. She had admitted they were to meet in the Hollow, and he had seen her go there and flee from it in horror. He liked Fazenda Lee, but why hadn't she done the natural thing and reported the murder? Her excuse for not having done so seemed odd and flimsy. Then his thought persistently veered back to Eve, properly named, as Alwyn Rotherdene had said. Why was she playing about with a man of Mostyn's stamp, and with that hot-blooded gypsy violinist, too, when she had a husband like Sir Quentin? Most women would envy her. Mark wondered if Fazenda Lee did. Obviously she shared Mr. Elphick's adoration of Sir Quentin. Queer that Eve should twice have narrowly escaped death from inexplicably falling objects. What was this menace that hung over the Grange? Mere accident, or some malevolent human agency? If Sir Quentin did not open the subject in the morning, he himself would lead up to it. But, of course, without betraying Mrs. Carswell's confidence. What a nervous, fluttery little body she was. Mark wondered how long she had been at the Grange. The housekeeper he remembered had been a matronly, comfortable, wholesome sort of person. From Mrs. Carswell, Mark's thoughts returned to Eve's unliked maid, Cynthia Melsom. There, he fancied, was a woman who had known the dark places of life and been hardened by her experiences, not a woman one would like to have for an enemy. She would be relentless, her brilliant, resolute eyes, and her mouth, firm, even hard, when she did not choose to have it provocative, declared that. Oh, she was a man's woman, he had seen that at once, and she still thirsted for the admiration of men, but he guessed that she no longer trusted them. Sleep was impossible. Mark got up, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and sat by the open window smoking. The downs lay black and hunched in the starlight. The peace of their spacious presence stole over his troubled senses. He grew drowsy, and then he heard in the corridor a low, smothered cry. Disregarding Mrs. Carswell's warning, Mark went quickly to the door and out into the dark hall. A tall, shadowy figure showed halfway down the corridor. Mark advanced toward it and struck a match on the wall. The light flickered for a moment on the white, startled face of Cynthia Melsom, and then went out, leaving the hall in darkness again. Mark had had time to observe that the lady's maid was wearing a silk negligee, and that her hair hung over her shoulders in two long, heavy chestnut braids. "What is the matter?" Mark demanded. "Why did you cry out?" "Not so loud, Mr. Brandon," she whispered in response. "No need to wake other people. I had a toothache and was going down to the kitchen to heat some water. I fancied I saw someone creeping up those stairs to the top floor of the east wing." She indicated an open door and staircase showing dimly at the end of the corridor. "There's been queer doings here at night, and I lost my nerve and cried out. I'm sorry I woke you up." "You don't often lose your nerve, do you, Cynthia?" suddenly asked a quiet, sarcastic voice that made both Mark and the lady's maid start in surprise. A light flashed on through an open doorway, and they saw Alwyn Rotherdene in dressing gown and slippers standing on the threshold. There was a hard, almost sinister expression about his fine eyes and the lines of his mouth. Cynthia was equal to the occasion. "No, Mr. Rotherdene," she agreed coolly. "I don't often lose it, but you know there's been such queer doings here at night." "There wouldn't be," he interrupted, "if every one would keep to their rooms. I shouldn't acquire the habit of night-walking, if I were you, Cynthia." Her eyes matched his in hardness. "Do you ever get the habit yourself, Mr. Rotherdene?" Her tone level and insolent. Alwyn smiled coldly. "Sometimes, perhaps, but I can assure you, Cynthia, it is not a healthful habit for you or others. You see, you have waked up Mr. Brandon and myself. And if anyone else had rooms in this wing, you would have waked them up too. Really, my dear girl, you did not exercise your usual discretion if your intention in leaving your room was to attempt to use the telephone without the knowledge of anyone here." He nodded toward a telephone stand in the embrasure of an oriel window. "I assure you I am a very light sleeper and should have overheard any message you had sent." Cynthia gave a low, scornful laugh. "Very clever you are, Mr. Rotherdene. I don't doubt you are a light sleeper, and sometimes given to night-walking, too, and that, I'll admit, is not a healthful habit at the Grange. But you've guessed wide of the mark this time. I came into this hall because those stairs," she indicated a circular stairway to the left of the telephone, "lead down into the dining room, and so into the kitchen where I was going, as I told Mr. Brandon to heat some water. I've a tooth that's aching." Alwyn Rotherdene's lips curled in a cynical smile. "It's a pity you did not have that tooth out in Brighton this afternoon. I understand you went there." Cynthia's body stiffened. "You know a good deal, don't you, Mr. Rotherdene, about what doesn't concern you? But perhaps you'll take a word of advice, unless you know all about this matter, too. Better find out who it was I saw creeping like a shadow up the stairs to the top floor of the east wing a few minutes ago." The light from Alwyn's open door shone full on Cynthia's face, white, though defiant. Rotherdene gave her a sharp look. "Do you happen to be speaking the truth?" "Oh, it's the truth, Mr. Rotherdene. Why else do you suppose I cried out? I couldn't say whether it was a man or woman I saw. Just a shadow, it seemed. If the stairs hadn't creaked, I shouldn't have seen it at all. It startled me, I can tell you. I don't fancy anyone would creep up at night into a disused part of the house unless they were up to some mischief like what we've had going on here for months." For some reason, Alwyn seemed disinclined to believe her story. "Imagination can make us see many things that do not exist, and you are not helping whatever mischief there may be here by going night-walking. If it is your tooth that prevents you from staying quietly in bed, I can give you some medicine that will be far more effective than hot water." Cynthia tossed her heavy chestnut braids. "You need not trouble about my tooth, Mr. Rotherdene. The pain is going now, and I think I shall be able to sleep without even hot water." "In case the pain should return and send you roaming again," remarked Alwyn quietly, "permit me to remind you that I am a very light sleeper. Furthermore, I shall leave my door partly open. You will observe that it is almost in a direct line with the telephone." Cynthia's eyes were wells of resentment, but she made no retort. "Aren't you going up into the east wing to see what's there?" she asked in a steady voice. "Nothing is there but old furniture," he answered shortly. "Better get back to bed, Cynthia. You are wasting your time. You'll get no chance to telephone privately tonight." Cynthia smiled. "Perhaps you've your reasons, Mr. Rotherdene, for not caring to go up in the east wing now." Alwyn's dark skin flushed. "The east wing holds nothing but dust and oblivion and your own concocted fancies." As he spoke, there came a sound from overhead, from the upper floor of the disused east wing. A sound as of a chair or some other piece of furniture being overturned. End of chapter 6.